The arrogant contractor Tyler Brennan thought he was untouchable as he sneered at the young Marine's prosthetic leg, loudly declaring, "Maybe if you hadn't been so careless overseas, taxpayers wouldn't have to fund your charity cases," while his construction crew laughed behind him. When I stepped forward to defend Corporal Martinez, Brennan turned his venom on me, smirking as he said, "Listen lady, this is a real workplace. Why don't you go back to pushing papers in some office where you belong?" I said nothing, simply pulled out my phone and made one quiet call. 3 hours later, Brennan and his entire crew were escorted off the naval base in handcuffs, their company's multi-million-dollar contract terminated permanently, because none of them had any idea they just disrespected Admiral Rebecca Kane, the youngest female admiral in Pacific Fleet history, and the woman who had personally approved their security clearances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog rolled across Monterey Bay as I walked through the construction zone at Naval Postgraduate School in Pacific Grove, California, my civilian clothes and clipboard making me appear like just another project coordinator checking on the new cybersecurity research facility being built. The $40 million project was scheduled for completion in 6 months, and as the admiral overseeing the base's strategic development, I made it my practice to conduct unannounced inspections without revealing my identity, a habit that had served me well throughout my 22-year naval career. What I witnessed that Tuesday morning would change everything. The autumn air carried the familiar sounds of heavy machinery and construction chatter, but something else caught my attention, raised voices coming from near the main foundation work. As I approached, I saw a young Marine in dress blues, his left leg clearly a prosthetic, standing rigidly at attention while facing a large, red-faced man in a hard hat who was gesturing aggressively. The Marine was Corporal James Martinez, 24 years old, who had lost his leg to an IED explosion during his second tour in Afghanistan. I recognized him immediately, not just because I made it my business to know every wounded warrior on my base, but because I had personally signed the orders for his medical retirement ceremony scheduled for the following week. Martinez had requested to visit the construction site because the new cybersecurity facility would house the very technology that might have prevented the attack that cost him his leg. But Tyler Brennan, the lead contractor from Pinnacle Construction Solutions, clearly saw something else entirely. "I'm telling you for the last time, soldier boy," Brennan's voice carried across the construction site, "this is a hard hat area, and we don't have time to babysit tourists who want to play dress up and pretend they're still useful." His crew of 6 workers had gathered around, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Corporal Martinez maintained his composure with the discipline I'd come to expect from our Marines. "Sir, I have written authorization from Base Command to observe the cybersecurity facility construction. I can show you the documentation if needed." Brennan snatched the papers from Martinez's hand, barely glancing at them before crumpling them up. "Authorization? Kid, I've been building military facilities since before you were in diapers. You think some fancy paperwork makes up for the fact that you're a walking liability? Maybe if you hadn't been so careless overseas, taxpayers wouldn't have to fund charity cases like you." The words hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I wasn't just witnessing disrespect, I was watching a civilian contractor, whose company was being paid with taxpayer dollars to serve our military, deliberately humiliating a Marine who had sacrificed his leg for his country. Martinez's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Sir, I respectfully disagree with your characterization. I served my country with honor, and my injury occurred while protecting fellow service members during a combat operation." "Honor?" Brennan laughed loudly, encouraging his crew to join in. "Kid, honor doesn't pay for prosthetic legs or cover the cost of all those medical bills. You're a financial burden now, plain and simple. Maybe it's time to accept reality and find a nice desk job somewhere far away from actual working people." That's when I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice carrying the authority I developed over 2 decades of command, "but I think you're out of line." Brennan turned toward me, his eyes taking in my civilian clothes, dark slacks, a simple blouse, and a jacket that concealed my rank insignia. To him, I looked like exactly what I was trying to appear, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard who had no business interfering with his work site. His expression shifted to one of condescending annoyance mixed with amusement. "And you are?" "Someone who thinks you owe this Marine an apology," I replied calmly. The construction crew had gone quiet now, sensing the tension. Martinez shot me a grateful look but remained at attention, clearly uncomfortable with the situation escalating on his behalf. Brennan's face reddened further as he stepped closer to me, using his considerable height, he was probably 6'4", to try to intimidate me. Listen lady, this is a real workplace with real deadlines and real men doing real work. Maybe if you hadn't been so busy playing dress-up in some air-conditioned office, you'd understand how construction sites actually operate. Why don't you take your little clipboard and go back to pushing papers wherever you belong, and let the adults handle the important stuff? His crew shifted uncomfortably. Even they seemed to recognize that their boss had crossed a line, but none of them spoke up. I looked at Brennan for a long moment, studying his face, the arrogant smirk, the casual cruelty in his eyes, the complete confidence that he could say whatever he wanted to whomever he wanted without consequences. In my years of command, I'd encountered men like Tyler Brennan before, bullies who mistook rank for character and authority for intelligence. Without saying another word, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Commander Torres? This is Admiral Kane. I need you to contact the base security commander immediately. We have a situation at the construction site that requires immediate attention. Also, please have someone from the contracting office meet me here within the hour. We need to review Pinnacle Construction Solutions security clearances and contract compliance. The silence that followed my phone call was deafening. Brennan's smirk faltered slightly, but he was still processing what he'd heard. Martinez's eyes widened in recognition, and he immediately stood even straighter, if that was possible. Ma'am, Martinez said quietly, Admiral Kane, I apologize for any inconvenience this situation may have caused. Brennan's face went through a series of color changes as the reality of his situation began to dawn on him. Admiral? You're claiming to be an admiral? I didn't claim anything. I simply waited. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Within 20 minutes, 2 black SUVs pulled up to the construction site. Commander Torres emerged from the first vehicle, followed by the base security chief and 2 military police officers. From the second vehicle came Captain Richardson from the contracting office, along with 2 civilian investigators from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. The next 3 hours would prove to be the longest of Tyler Brennan's professional life. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how we reached this moment, how a civilian contractor came to humiliate a wounded Marine in front of the youngest female admiral in Pacific Fleet history, we need to go back to the beginning, to a small town in Montana where a girl named Rebecca Kane first learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain quiet until the moment you choose to speak. Now before we dive deeper into this incredible military justice story, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me what branch of service you or your family members have served in. Our military community is strong here, and I love connecting with fellow service members and military families. Also, if you've ever witnessed someone disrespecting our veterans, share your story. Did you speak up? What happened? And listen, if stories about standing up for our wounded warriors and military justice get your blood pumping like they do mine, you absolutely need to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Why? Because tomorrow I've got an absolutely incredible story saved for you about a Navy SEAL who single-handedly exposed an entire corrupt defense contractor ring that was stealing millions from veteran programs. Trust me, the way justice gets served in that one will leave you cheering. Plus, next week I'm dropping a story about an Air Force pilot who used her Top Gun training to outmaneuver corporate executives trying to steal her family's aviation business. You won't want to miss any of these. But right now, let's get back to Admiral Rebecca Kane and how a small-town girl from the mountains of Montana became the youngest female admiral in Pacific Fleet history, and why she made it her mission to protect every service member under her command, especially the wounded warriors who had already given so much. The crisp mountain air of Glacier Falls, Montana, carried the scent of pine and fresh snow as 8-year-old Rebecca Kane stood on the front porch of her family's modest ranch house, watching her grandfather polish his Purple Heart medal with the same careful attention he gave to everything in his life. Grandpa Thomas Kane, Master Sergeant, retired, had received that medal after taking shrapnel in Korea, but he never talked about the war itself, only about the men who didn't come home. Responsibility isn't about rank, Becca, he'd tell her during their evening talks on that same porch, his weathered hands holding the metal up to catch the last rays of Montana sunlight. It's about taking care of the people who can't take care of themselves. That's what real leaders do, they shield others from the storm, even when nobody's watching. Those words would echo in Rebecca's mind 28 years later as she stood in that construction zone, watching a civilian contractor humiliate a wounded Marine. But we're getting ahead of ourselves again. Let's go back to where it all began. Rebecca's father, David Kane, worked as a civilian contractor for Malmstrom Air Force Base, maintaining the computer systems that helped protect America's nuclear arsenal. Her mother, Sarah, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school and ran the town's only veteran support group from their church basement every Thursday evening. The Kane household was one where military service wasn't just respected, it was revered as the highest form of public service. Growing up in Glacier Falls meant knowing everyone's story. The hardware store owner, Mr. Peterson, had lost 2 fingers in Vietnam but never complained about the pain when the weather changed. Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the local diner, had a son serving in the Army Rangers and kept his deployment photos taped to the cash register so she could see him every day. And then there was Jimmy Clearwater, just 3 years older than Rebecca, who came back from his first tour in Iraq missing his left arm and struggling with nightmares that kept the whole neighborhood awake. Rebecca was 12 when Jimmy returned home to Glacier Falls. She watched the town rally around him, bringing meals, offering jobs, making sure he knew he was valued and loved. But she also watched Jimmy struggle with feeling like a burden, watched him apologize for things that weren't his fault, watched him flinch when people stared at his missing arm. That's when Rebecca made a promise to herself that would shape her entire life. She would become the kind of leader who protected people like Jimmy, who made sure wounded warriors never had to feel ashamed or apologetic for their sacrifices. Her path to the Naval Academy wasn't traditional for a girl from rural Montana. Most of her classmates planned to work ranches, attend the state university, maybe become teachers or nurses. But Rebecca had different dreams. She spent her high school years excelling in mathematics and computer science, learning everything she could about military history and naval strategy, and writing letters to her congressman requesting nomination to the U.S. Naval Academy. The day her acceptance letter arrived, the entire town of Glacier Falls celebrated. Even the local newspaper, the Glacier Falls Herald, ran a front-page story, "Local girl accepted to Naval Academy, first in town history." But Rebecca's journey to Annapolis was just the beginning of a military career that would be marked by one consistent theme: protecting those who served under her command, especially the wounded and vulnerable. At the Naval Academy, she majored in systems engineering and cybersecurity, graduating 3rd in her class in 2002. Her first assignment was aboard the USS Portland, a San Antonio-class amphibious transport dock, where she served as a communications officer during Operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. It was there that she first encountered the bureaucratic challenges that wounded service members faced when trying to access care and benefits. Lieutenant Rebecca Kane made it her unofficial mission to navigate the system for injured sailors and Marines, spending her off-duty hours filling out paperwork, making phone calls, and ensuring that wounded warriors got the medical attention and benefits they had earned. Her commanding officers noticed, and more importantly, her fellow service members noticed. By 2008, now Lieutenant Commander Kane had been assigned to the Pentagon, working in naval cybersecurity operations. But even in Washington, D.C., surrounded by policy and politics, she never forgot the lesson her grandfather had taught her on that Montana porch: real leaders shield others from the storm. Her reputation grew throughout the Navy not just for her technical expertise. She had become one of the military's leading experts on cybersecurity and digital warfare, but for her unwavering commitment to taking care of her people. Officers requested transfers to serve under her command. Enlisted personnel knew that Commander Kane would fight for them when they needed help navigating military bureaucracy. The promotion to captain came in 2015, followed by her assignment to Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, where she oversaw advanced cybersecurity research and development. And it was there, in 2019, that she received the call that would change her life forever: promotion to Rear Admiral, making her the youngest female admiral in Pacific Fleet history at age 41. But with great rank came great responsibility, and Admiral Kane took that responsibility seriously. She made it her practice to know every wounded warrior on her base personally, to conduct unannounced inspections of facilities and contractors, and to ensure that anyone serving under her command, active duty or veteran, was treated with the dignity and respect they had earned through their service. Which brings us back to that foggy Tuesday morning in October, when Admiral Rebecca Kane chose to dress in civilian clothes and inspect a construction site, never imagining that she would witness the kind of disrespect that would trigger every protective instinct she had developed over 22 years of military service. Tyler Brennan thought he was dealing with just another middle-aged woman with a clipboard. He had no idea he was about to face the full authority of a woman who had spent her entire adult life preparing for moments exactly like this one. The Pacific fog clung to the Monterey Peninsula like a familiar friend as Admiral Rebecca Kane reviewed the morning briefings in her office at Naval Postgraduate School. At 43, she had commanded respect across the Pacific Fleet not through intimidation or politics, but through an unwavering commitment to excellence and an almost legendary dedication to her personnel. Her corner office in Spa-Nagle Hall overlooked the construction site where, in just a few hours, she would witness an event that would test every principle she held dear. But this morning, like every morning for the past 4 years, Admiral Kane began her day by reviewing what she called her guardian files, detailed profiles of every wounded warrior, struggling veteran, and transitioning service member within her command. Today's stack included updates on 17 different cases, from a Navy cryptologist dealing with PTSD to a Marine logistics specialist learning to walk again after losing both legs in Syria. The file that caught her attention this particular morning belonged to Corporal James Martinez, whose medical retirement ceremony was scheduled for the following week. Rebecca had been following Martinez's case personally since his arrival at the base 6 months earlier. The young Marine had specifically requested assignment to Monterey because he wanted to contribute to the cybersecurity research that might prevent future attacks like the one that had cost him his leg. What impressed Admiral Kane most about Martinez wasn't his resilience, though that was remarkable, but his absolute refusal to be defined by his injury. Despite facing a complete career transition, despite the physical challenges of adapting to a prosthetic leg, despite the bureaucratic nightmares that came with medical retirement, Martinez had maintained the kind of positive attitude and dedication to service that reminded Rebecca why she had chosen the military as her life's calling. She made a note to personally attend his retirement ceremony. In her experience, these moments mattered more than most people realized. When wounded warriors saw flag officers taking time to honor their service, it sent a message that their sacrifices hadn't been forgotten or minimized. Rebecca's commitment to her wounded warriors wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal, rooted in lessons learned from her grandfather's example and reinforced by experiences throughout her career that had shown her how easily the system could fail those who needed it most. During her time as a lieutenant commander at the Pentagon, she had witnessed firsthand how bureaucratic indifference could destroy lives. She remembered Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a brilliant communications specialist who had lost her right arm in Afghanistan and then spent 8 months fighting for basic accommodations to continue her military career. The system wanted to medical board Gonzalez out quickly and quietly, but Rebecca had spent countless hours navigating regulations, writing memos, and making phone calls to ensure Gonzalez received the support she deserved. That case had taught Rebecca a crucial lesson: rank and authority meant nothing if you weren't willing to use them to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She had made a promise to herself during those frustrating months fighting for Gonzalez: if she ever achieved significant command authority, she would use it to shield wounded warriors from the institutional indifference that too often characterized their treatment. As captain at Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia, Rebecca had implemented what became known throughout the Navy as the Kane Protocol, a comprehensive support system for transitioning service members that included dedicated case managers, streamlined paperwork processes, and mandatory respect training for all civilian contractors working on naval facilities. The program had been so successful that it was eventually adopted fleet-wide. But Rebecca's most defining moment as a military leader had come during her final year as captain, when she discovered that a civilian contracting company was systematically overcharging the Navy for services provided to wounded warriors. The company, Meridian Support Services, had been billing premium rates for basic transportation and administrative support, essentially profiting from veterans' disabilities. The investigation Rebecca initiated led to congressional hearings, criminal charges, and the recovery of over $12 million in fraudulent billing. More importantly, it resulted in new oversight procedures that protected wounded service members from exploitation. The case had earned Rebecca national recognition and likely contributed to her early promotion to Admiral, but for her, the real victory was ensuring that veterans like Martinez would never be seen as profit opportunities by unscrupulous contractors. Which made what she would witness in just a few hours all the more infuriating. Admiral Kane's morning routine also included a personal practice that few people knew about. She spent 30 minutes each day reading letters from family members of service personnel under her command. These weren't official communications, but personal notes that parents, spouses, and children sent expressing gratitude for her leadership or requesting help with specific problems. Today's pile included a letter from Martinez's mother, Rosa, written in careful English with occasional Spanish phrases. The letter described her pride in her son's service, her gratitude for the support he had received at Monterrey, and her hope that his transition to civilian life would be smooth. Rosa Martinez had included a family photo showing James in his dress blues, standing proudly beside his parents and younger sister outside their modest home in Tucson, Arizona. Admiral Kane, the letter concluded, "Thank you for seeing James as a whole person, not just his injury. When he calls home, he talks about feeling respected and valued at your base. This means everything to our family." Rebecca set the letter aside, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility that came with command. Every decision she made, every policy she implemented, every interaction she had with her personnel rippled outward to affect families across the country. The trust that people like Rosa Martinez placed in her leadership was both humbling and motivating. Her executive assistant, Commander Patricia Torres, knocked on the door and entered with the day's schedule. Patricia had served as Rebecca's aide for 2 years and had learned to read her commander's moods with remarkable accuracy. "Good morning, Admiral. Your first appointment is the budget review at 0800, followed by the cybersecurity briefing at 0930. You also have the contractor inspection scheduled for 1,100 hours at the construction site." Rebecca looked up from Martinez's file. "Patricia, what do we know about the current contractor situation at the new facility?" Commander Torres consulted her tablet. "Pinnacle Construction Solutions has the primary contract. They're approximately 3 weeks behind schedule, but within acceptable parameters. The site foreman is Tyler Brennan, with about 15 years of experience on military projects. No major issues reported through official channels." "Unofficial channels?" Patricia hesitated slightly. "There have been a few complaints from base personnel about unprofessional conduct, but nothing formal has been filed. Some of our people feel the contractor crew doesn't show appropriate respect for military personnel who visit the site." Admiral Kane made a mental note to pay particular attention to personnel interactions during her inspection. In her experience, unprofessional conduct from civilian contractors often meant something much more serious than paperwork violations. "Any specific incidents?" "Nothing documented, ma'am. Just general complaints about attitude and respect issues." Rebecca nodded. Throughout her career, she had learned that the most serious problems often existed in the space between official reports and actual reality. Formal complaints required courage and paperwork that many service members were reluctant to pursue, especially when dealing with civilian contractors who might retaliate against their careers. As she prepared to leave her office for the morning's meetings, Admiral Kane glanced once more at the photo from Rosa Martinez. In a few hours, she would conduct her routine inspection of the construction site, never imagining that she would witness the kind of disrespect that would trigger every protective instinct she had developed over 22 years of military service. The fog was beginning to lift from Monterey Bay, but the storm that was about to break over Tyler Brennan and Pinnacle Construction Solutions was just beginning to gather strength. Tyler Brennan had built his reputation in military construction through a combination of aggressive bidding, political connections, and an uncanny ability to deliver projects on time despite cutting corners wherever possible. At 48, he commanded Pinnacle Construction Solutions with the swagger of a man who believed his own propaganda about being indispensable to the defense contracting community. Standing 6'4" with prematurely gray hair and a perpetual tan from years of outdoor work, Brennan projected an image of competence that had fooled procurement officers for over a decade. His company had secured over $200 million in military contracts across the Pacific region, and he never let anyone forget it. What military personnel and oversight committees didn't see was the pattern of disrespect and contempt that Brennan harbored toward the very people his company was supposed to serve. Brennan's disdain for military personnel had roots that went deeper than simple civilian-military tensions. His father, Robert Brennan, had been a career Army officer who demanded perfection at home with the same intensity he brought to his command. Young Tyler had grown up in a household where military precision was expected but military values were never truly explained or appreciated. When Robert Brennan died of a heart attack during Tyler's senior year of high school, he left behind a son who associated military authority with harsh criticism and impossible standards. Rather than pursuing military service himself, Tyler had deliberately chosen a path that would allow him to profit from the military while maintaining his independence from its discipline and values. Defense contracting gave him access to military facilities and personnel, but without the constraints of rank, chain of command, or military justice. He could make good money working for the military while never having to submit to military authority. This fundamental misunderstanding of military culture had shaped every aspect of how Pinnacle Construction Solutions operated on military installations. Brennan saw service members not as customers to be served or heroes to be respected, but as obstacles to be managed and, when necessary, intimidated into compliance with his construction schedules. His crew of 6 workers reflected Brennan's attitudes and hiring practices. He deliberately recruited men who shared his disdain for military personnel, believing that civilian contractors should never have to defer to uniformed personnel, regardless of rank or experience. His foreman, Derek Walsh, was a former Marine who had been discharged under other than honorable conditions for repeated disciplinary problems. Walsh brought both insider knowledge of military culture and a bitter resentment toward the institution that had rejected him. The other crew members, Jake Morrison, Carl Stevens, Luis Vargas, and brothers Danny and Kevin O'Brien, were all competent construction workers, but they had been selected as much for their willingness to follow Brennan's lead in showing disrespect toward military personnel as for their technical skills. Brennan had learned that crews who shared his attitudes were less likely to report his behavior to military supervisors or contracting officers. Over the years, Pinnacle Construction Solutions had developed what Brennan privately called his dominant strategy for working on military bases. The approach was simple: establish from day one that civilian contractors were in charge of their work sites, and that military personnel, regardless of rank, were guests who needed permission to be present. This strategy had worked well for Brennan because it relied on most military personnel's reluctance to escalate conflicts with civilian contractors, especially when their complaints might be seen as petty grievances rather than serious issues. Brennan's confrontational approach had generated complaints at previous job sites, but he had perfected the art of making these incidents appear to be misunderstandings rather than deliberate disrespect. When formally questioned by contracting officers, he would express surprise and concern, claiming that military personnel had misinterpreted his crew's dedication to safety and security as rudeness. He would promise better communication while privately instructing his crew to be more subtle in their disrespect. The strategy had worked because Brennan understood that most military leaders preferred to avoid conflicts with civilian contractors. Formal complaints required extensive documentation, investigations, and paperwork that busy officers preferred to avoid. It was easier to simply instruct their personnel to stay away from construction areas than to fight protracted battles with contracting companies. But Brennan's success had also made him increasingly bold in his behavior. Each successful intimidation of military personnel reinforced his belief that uniformed service members were essentially powerless to challenge civilian contractor authority. This growing confidence had led him to become more blatant in his disrespect, particularly toward personnel he perceived as vulnerable or unlikely to fight back. Wounded warriors were particular targets for Brennan's contempt. In his view, injured service members represented everything he disliked about military culture. They demanded special accommodations, they slowed down operations with their medical needs, and they served as constant reminders of the costs of military service that he preferred to ignore. Brennan had developed a repertoire of subtle and not-so-subtle ways to make wounded veterans feel unwelcome on his job sites. The morning of his confrontation with Corporal Martinez and Admiral Kane, Brennan was already in a foul mood. Pinnacle Construction Solutions was 3 weeks behind schedule on the Naval Postgraduate School project, and his company was facing potential financial penalties if the delays continued. The cybersecurity facility was more complex than Brennan had anticipated when he submitted his bid, and the specialized security requirements were creating unexpected complications and costs. Brennan blamed these problems on what he saw as excessive military oversight and unrealistic expectations. In his mind, the Navy was making unreasonable demands for quality and precision that civilian construction projects didn't require. He had spent the previous evening arguing with his project manager about cost overruns and deadline pressures, and he arrived at the job site determined to reassert control over the situation. When Corporal Martinez appeared at the construction site that morning, requesting permission to observe the cybersecurity facility construction, Brennan saw an opportunity to send a message to any military personnel who might be watching. Here was a wounded veteran, exactly the kind of person Brennan viewed as a symbol of military weakness and dependency, asking for special accommodations that would disrupt his work schedule. Brennan's crew understood the dynamic immediately. They had seen their boss use similar confrontations in the past to establish dominance and send clear messages about who controlled the work environment. None of them particularly enjoyed watching him humiliate military personnel, but they had learned that challenging Brennan's authority led to unemployment, and construction jobs with military contractors paid well enough to ensure their silence. Derek Walsh, the former Marine, felt particular discomfort watching Brennan target wounded warriors, but his own complicated relationship with military service made him reluctant to intervene. Walsh had left the Marines under circumstances that still caused him shame, and he told himself that staying employed was more important than defending service members who had succeeded where he had failed. What none of them realized was that their usual intimidation tactics were about to encounter someone who possessed both the authority and the determination to hold them accountable for their behavior. Tyler Brennan had spent 15 years believing that civilian contractors were essentially immune from military justice, and that belief was about to be shattered in the most dramatic way possible. Admiral Rebecca Kane was about to teach Pinnacle Construction Solutions a lesson about respect, accountability, and the true meaning of military authority. The secure filing cabinet in Admiral Kane's office contained documents that very few people in the Pacific Fleet were authorized to access. Among these classified materials was a thick folder marked Base Security Protocols, Special Authority Provisions, that outlined the extraordinary powers granted to installation commanders when dealing with threats to military personnel or facility security. Most people, including civilian contractors like Tyler Brennan, operated under the mistaken assumption that military authority had clear limitations when dealing with civilian personnel on military installations. They believed that as long as they weren't military members themselves, they were largely immune from military justice and could only be held accountable through slow, bureaucratic civilian channels. This assumption was dangerously incorrect. What Brennan and his crew didn't understand was that anyone working on a military installation, contractor, visitor, or civilian employee, was subject to military authority and could have their access immediately revoked for violations of military regulations, security protocols, or conduct standards. More importantly, installation commanders had the authority to terminate contracts and ban individuals from all military facilities if their behavior was deemed detrimental to good order, discipline, or military readiness. Admiral Kane had discovered these special authority provisions during her time at the Pentagon, when she was researching ways to protect wounded warriors from contractor exploitation. The legal framework existed to hold civilian contractors accountable for their behavior toward military personnel, but it was rarely used because most commanders either didn't know about these authorities or were reluctant to exercise them due to potential legal complications. During her assignment as captain at Naval Surface Warfare Center Dahlgren, Rebecca had worked with the base legal officer to develop a comprehensive understanding of exactly when and how these authorities could be exercised. She had even used them once before, when a civilian contractor had been caught stealing equipment from wounded veterans' quarters. That contractor had been banned from all Navy facilities within 6 hours, and his company's contract had been terminated the same day. The key was documentation and immediate action. Military commanders could exercise these authorities quickly and decisively, but they needed clear evidence of misconduct and proper legal procedures to ensure their actions would withstand any subsequent challenges. Admiral Kane had learned to build ironclad cases that left no room for appeal or reversal. Her approach to contractor oversight had been refined over years of experience with civilian companies that tried to take advantage of military personnel. She had developed what she privately called her intelligence gathering protocol, a systematic method of documenting contractor behavior through multiple sources that would provide legal justification for strong action when necessary. This protocol included regular unannounced inspections conducted while dressed in civilian clothes, allowing her to observe contractor behavior when they believed no military authority was present. She maintained detailed files on every contractor working on her installations, including personnel records, security clearance information, past performance evaluations, and any reports of problematic behavior. Most importantly, Admiral Kane had cultivated relationships with enlisted personnel and junior officers who felt comfortable reporting contractor misconduct directly to her office. She had learned that many problems with civilian contractors were never officially reported because military personnel feared retaliation or believed their complaints wouldn't be taken seriously by the chain of command. Her executive assistant, Commander Torres, had been specifically trained to recognize patterns of contractor misconduct and to immediately begin documentation procedures when potential problems were identified. Torres maintained what they called the early warning system, a network of contacts throughout the base who would quietly report concerning behavior before it escalated to formal complaints. The system had been tested several times during Admiral Kane's tenure at Naval Postgraduate School. 6 months earlier, a different contractor had been terminated after Torres received multiple reports of inappropriate comments toward female service members. The contractor had been removed from the installation within 4 hours of the formal complaint being filed, and his company had been blacklisted from future Navy contracts. What made Admiral Kane's approach particularly effective was her understanding of the political and legal landscape surrounding defense contracting. She knew that contractor companies relied heavily on maintaining good relationships with military installations to secure future contracts. A single incident that resulted in contract termination and facility banning could destroy a company's reputation throughout the defense contracting community. She also understood that most contractors were unaware of how quickly and decisively military authority could be exercised when properly documented. Companies like Pinnacle Construction Solutions operated under the assumption that military personnel were reluctant to take strong action against civilian contractors, and this assumption made them careless about their behavior and vulnerable to sudden, overwhelming consequences. Admiral Kane's personal file on Pinnacle Construction Solutions had been growing steadily since their arrival at the base. She had already received 3 informal reports of disrespectful behavior toward military personnel, including one incident where Tyler Brennan had allegedly referred to a Navy lieutenant as just another pretty boy officer who's never done real work. None of these incidents had been formally reported, but they had been carefully documented and filed. She had also noted irregularities in Pinnacle's security procedures and worker background checks. 2 of Brennan's crew members had minor criminal records that should have disqualified them from working on sensitive military projects, but the contracting office had apparently overlooked these issues during the vetting process. Admiral Kane had been planning to address these problems through official channels, but she preferred to have comprehensive evidence before taking action. Her morning review of security protocols had been prompted by Corporal Martinez's scheduled visit to the construction site. Admiral Kane had personally approved his request to observe the cybersecurity facility construction, understanding that Martinez's interest in the project was both professional and personal. She had also made a mental note to ensure that the contractor crew treated Martinez with appropriate respect. What she hadn't anticipated was that her routine inspection would coincide with Martinez's visit, creating the perfect opportunity to observe Pinnacle Construction Solutions' behavior toward a wounded warrior when they believed no military authority was present. The timing would prove to be either incredibly fortunate or devastatingly unlucky, depending on your perspective. Admiral Kane's phone contained direct contact information for every key office on the base, including the numbers she would soon use to bring the full weight of military authority down on Tyler Brennan and his crew. Commander Torres was standing by in the Admiral's office, ready to execute the documentation and notification procedures they had practiced multiple times. The base security chief, Colonel Marcus Thompson, had been briefed on Admiral Kane's contractor oversight protocols and was prepared to respond immediately to any situation involving civilian contractor misconduct. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service maintained an office on the base specifically to handle security violations and contractor-related crimes. Most importantly, the base legal officer had pre-drafted the documentation necessary to terminate civilian contracts and ban individuals from military installations. All that was needed was Admiral Kane's authorization and specific details of the misconduct that would justify such dramatic action. As she walked toward the construction site that foggy October morning, Admiral Rebecca Kane carried with her the full authority of the United States Navy and the determination to use that authority to protect every service member under her command. Tyler Brennan was about to discover that his assumptions about military authority were not just wrong, they were catastrophically wrong. The warning signs had been accumulating for weeks, but like most institutional problems, they remained largely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for patterns. Corporal Martinez wasn't the first military member to experience disrespect from Pinnacle Construction Solutions. He was simply the first incident that Admiral Kane would witness personally. 3 weeks earlier, Petty Officer Second Class Jennifer Walsh had attempted to deliver updated security protocols to the construction site. The young Navy cybersecurity specialist had been tasked with ensuring that Pinnacle's crew understood new classified material handling procedures for the facility they were building. What should have been a routine administrative task had turned into a humiliating confrontation when Tyler Brennan questioned her authority and suggested that little girls shouldn't be handling big boy security matters. Walsh had completed her mission but hadn't filed a formal complaint. Like many junior enlisted personnel, she worried that reporting the incident might be seen as inability to handle challenging situations. She mentioned the confrontation to her supervisor, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, who made a note in his daily log but didn't elevate the issue to officer level. The pattern continued with Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, a Marine intelligence analyst who had visited the construction site to assess potential security vulnerabilities in the facility's design. Brennan's crew had subjected Chen to a series of increasingly aggressive questions about his clearance level and authority to be on the site, despite Chen showing proper identification and authorization. When Chen attempted to document structural concerns that could affect the facility's security rating, Derek Walsh had physically blocked his access to certain areas while making comments about pencil pushers who've never built anything in their lives. Chen, a veteran of 3 deployments who had received a Purple Heart for injuries sustained in Syria, had been particularly angered by the crew's dismissive attitude. But like Walsh, he had chosen not to file formal complaints, instead routing his concerns through his chain of command as contractor cooperation issues that were noted but not investigated. The most disturbing incident had occurred just 1 week before Admiral Kane's inspection, when Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blackwood had brought her daughter to the base for a school science project about military technology. 8-year-old Emma Blackwood had been fascinated by the construction equipment and had asked her mother if they could observe the building process from a safe distance. Tyler Brennan had approached them with obvious irritation, demanding to know why civilians were being allowed near his work site. When Lieutenant Commander Blackwood explained that she was stationed on the base and had proper authorization for her daughter's visit, Brennan had launched into a tirade about military personnel who use their kids as excuses to waste contractors' time with tourist activities. The interaction had escalated when Emma, excited about the construction project, had asked Brennan about the special equipment being used for the cybersecurity facility. Brennan had responded by telling the 8-year-old that little girls should stick to playing with dolls instead of bothering working men with stupid questions. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood had immediately ended the visit and filed a formal complaint through the contracting office. However, the complaint had been processed through standard bureaucratic channels, which meant it was still working its way through layers of administrative review when Admiral Kane conducted her inspection. Brennan had been notified of the complaint but had dismissed it as another example of oversensitive military personnel who couldn't handle direct communication from civilian contractors. What Brennan didn't understand was that each of these incidents had been building a comprehensive picture of his company's conduct that would soon reach Admiral Kane's attention through her early warning system. Commander Torres had been quietly collecting information from multiple sources, including the base chaplain's office, where several military families had sought counseling about feeling disrespected and unwelcome on their own installation. The pattern of escalating disrespect was also reflected in Pinnacle's work performance. As Brennan became more confident in his ability to intimidate military personnel, his crew had become increasingly careless about following military specifications and security protocols. Quality control inspections had revealed multiple deficiencies that suggested either incompetence or deliberate disregard for military standards. The most serious concern involved improper handling of classified facility plans. Brennan's crew had been observed by base security personnel discussing sensitive design details in unsecured areas where unauthorized personnel could overhear classified information. When confronted about these security violations, Brennan had claimed that his crew's security clearances gave them authority to discuss project details anywhere on the base. This fundamental misunderstanding of classification protocols had prompted Colonel Thompson, the base security chief, to begin his own investigation of Pinnacle Construction Solutions. Thompson had discovered that 2 of Brennan's crew members were working with expired security clearances, and that Brennan himself had never completed required annual security training updates. The security violations alone would have been sufficient grounds for contract termination, but the administrative process for addressing these issues typically took weeks or months to complete. Colonel Thompson had been preparing a comprehensive report for Admiral Kane when the morning's confrontation provided a more immediate catalyst for action. Meanwhile, Corporal Martinez had been dealing with his own challenges preparing for medical retirement while trying to contribute meaningfully to the cybersecurity research that had brought him to Monterey. His request to observe the facility construction wasn't casual curiosity, it was part of a detailed transition plan that would allow him to apply his combat experience and technical knowledge to civilian cybersecurity work. Martinez had spent 2 years studying cybersecurity while recovering from his injuries, earning certifications that would help him transition to a civilian career protecting the same kinds of systems he had once defended in uniform. His interest in the Naval Postgraduate School facility was both professional and personal. He wanted to understand how the military was adapting to cyber threats that had evolved since his injury. The young Marine had also been working with the base's Wounded Warrior Transition Program to develop recommendations for improving cybersecurity protocols based on lessons learned from the attack that had cost him his leg. His insights had already been incorporated into several research projects, and his dedication to continuing his service in a new capacity had impressed everyone who worked with him. What made the morning's confrontation particularly tragic was that Martinez had been looking forward to the construction site visit as validation that his transition plans were realistic and achievable. He had prepared detailed questions about the facility's design and had hoped to discuss potential collaboration opportunities with the construction team. Instead, he found himself facing the kind of civilian disrespect and hostility that no wounded warrior should ever encounter, especially on a military installation where he had every right to feel safe and valued. The confrontation with Brennan would force Martinez to confront the reality that his military service and sacrifices meant nothing to some of the civilians who profited from defense contracts. But Martinez's dignity and professionalism in the face of Brennan's aggression would also provide Admiral Kane with the perfect example of why her protective instincts toward wounded warriors were not just appropriate, they were essential for maintaining the trust and morale of military personnel who had already given so much in service to their country. The trap was set with the precision of a military operation, though Tyler Brennan had no idea he was walking into one. His overconfidence had been building for months, fed by successful intimidation of military personnel and a complete misunderstanding of the power dynamics on a naval installation. The morning of October 15th would prove to be the culmination of every mistake Brennan had made and every lesson he had refused to learn about respect, authority, and consequences. Brennan arrived at the construction site that morning with a particularly aggressive agenda. Pinnacle Construction Solutions was facing increasing pressure from the contracting office about delays, and Brennan had decided that the solution was to eliminate what he saw as unnecessary interruptions from military personnel. He had spent the previous evening developing what he called his zero-tolerance policy for military visitors to his work site. The policy was simple. Any military personnel who wanted to visit the construction area would need to submit formal requests through Brennan personally, explain their specific business purposes, and accept his authority to deny access based on safety and security concerns. Brennan believed this would give him effective control over military access to the site while providing legal cover for his actions. He had briefed his crew on the new policy during their morning huddle, emphasizing that they needed to be firm but professional in enforcing contractor authority over the work area. What Brennan actually meant was that they should continue their pattern of disrespectful behavior while using safety protocols as justification. Derek Walsh, the former Marine foreman, had privately questioned whether the new policy might create problems with base command, but Brennan had dismissed these concerns with characteristic arrogance. These military people are all about following procedures, Brennan had explained. As long as we frame everything in terms of safety and security, they can't challenge our authority without looking like they don't care about protecting their own people. The fatal flaw in Brennan's reasoning was his assumption that all military personnel were equal in authority and that base commanders were constrained by the same bureaucratic limitations that affected junior officers and enlisted personnel. Brennan had successfully intimidated lieutenants, captains, and enlisted personnel, leading him to believe that he could handle any military authority with the same tactics. His crew shared this dangerous overconfidence. Jake Morrison, one of the construction workers, had been bragging to his girlfriend about how easy it was to put military people in their place when they tried to interfere with civilian contractor operations. Carl Stevens had developed what he considered a sophisticated understanding of military psychology, explaining to anyone who would listen that uniformed personnel were trained to follow orders and would back down when confronted with confident civilian authority. The brothers Danny and Kevin O'Brien had turned disrespecting military personnel into a kind of competitive game, seeing who could make service members more uncomfortable during site visits. Luis Vargas, the youngest crew member, felt increasingly uncomfortable with the group's behavior but had been convinced by Brennan that challenging military personnel was a necessary part of maintaining contractor independence. None of them understood that their behavior had been systematically documented and reported through channels they weren't even aware existed. They had no idea that Admiral Kane maintained an intelligence network throughout the base specifically designed to identify and address contractor misconduct. They certainly didn't understand that their actions had already triggered legal and administrative procedures that would result in swift and decisive consequences. Brennan's plan for the morning included what he called a demonstration incident, a carefully orchestrated confrontation with military personnel that would establish his crew's authority over the work site while providing what he believed would be legal protection for future incidents. He wanted to create a situation where he could publicly assert contractor authority in front of witnesses, then document the encounter as evidence of his crew's commitment to safety and security protocols. When Corporal Martinez arrived at the construction site with proper authorization to observe the facility construction, Brennan saw the perfect opportunity to implement his demonstration plan. Martinez represented everything Brennan wanted to challenge about military authority. He was a wounded warrior seeking special accommodations, he was requesting access that would disrupt work schedules, and he appeared to be alone without senior officer support. Brennan had calculated that confronting a wounded Marine would send a clear message to other military personnel about contractor authority while generating minimal official pushback. In his experience, wounded warriors were often reluctant to create additional conflicts, and their medical situations made them vulnerable to accusations of seeking special treatment. The crew had been strategically positioned to witness the confrontation and provide supporting testimony if any official complaints were filed. Brennan had instructed them to focus on safety concerns and security protocols rather than personal attacks, believing this would provide legal cover for their actions. What Brennan had failed to consider was the possibility that senior military leadership might be conducting unannounced inspections of contractor operations. His intelligence about base security procedures was limited to what he had observed during normal working hours, when most senior officers were in meetings and administrative duties. He had never encountered flag-level leadership during his site operations and had assumed that admirals and generals were too removed from daily base activities to personally witness contractor behavior. The timing of Admiral Kane's inspection was the result of careful planning on her part, though Brennan had no way of knowing this. She had deliberately chosen to conduct her visit during the timeframe when Martinez was scheduled to observe the construction, wanting to ensure that the young Marine received appropriate treatment from civilian contractors. Admiral Kane's decision to dress in civilian clothes and carry a clipboard was part of her standard intelligence gathering protocol, designed to observe contractor behavior when they believed no military authority was present. She had used this technique successfully at previous installations to document problems that weren't being reported through official channels. The convergence of these factors, Brennan's aggressive new policy, Martinez's authorized visit, and Admiral Kane's undercover inspection, created the perfect storm that would destroy Pinnacle Construction Solutions' military contracting business within a matter of hours. As Brennan prepared to implement his demonstration plan, he was confident that he had identified the perfect target and created the ideal circumstances for establishing contractor dominance over military personnel. He had no idea that he was about to confront the highest-ranking officer on the installation, or that every word he spoke would be used as evidence in proceedings that would end his career in defense contracting. The trap was set, and Tyler Brennan was about to walk directly into it with the kind of arrogant confidence that would make his downfall both swift and absolute. The moment Tyler Brennan turned his venom toward Admiral Kane, treating her like just another civilian office worker who needed to be put in her place, he crossed a line that would destroy everything he had spent 15 years building in defense contracting. But in his arrogance and ignorance, he couldn't see the catastrophe unfolding before him. "Listen, lady," Brennan continued, his voice growing louder and more aggressive as his crew gathered around to watch the show, "this is a real workplace with real deadlines and real men doing real work. Maybe if you hadn't been so busy playing dress-up in some air-conditioned office, you'd understand how construction sites actually operate. Admiral Kane stood perfectly still, her expression neutral, allowing Brennan to dig his grave deeper with every word. Her 22 years of military experience had taught her that the most devastating responses often came from simply letting adversaries reveal their true character without interruption. Corporal Martinez watched in horror as the situation escalated far beyond what he had ever intended. The young Marine recognized something in Admiral Kane's posture and bearing that Brennan was completely missing, the kind of controlled authority that came only from years of high-level command. Martinez wanted to intervene, to somehow warn Brennan that he was making a terrible mistake, but military protocol demanded that he remain silent unless directly addressed. "Why don't you take your little clipboard and go back to pushing papers wherever you belong?" Brennan continued, stepping even closer to Admiral Kane in an obvious attempt at physical intimidation, "and let the adults handle the important stuff. This is man's work, and we don't have time to babysit women who want to play pretend." Derek Walsh, the former Marine foreman, felt a growing sense of unease as he watched the confrontation unfold. Something about the woman's complete lack of reaction to Brennan's aggression reminded him of senior officers he had encountered during his military service, people who possessed such confidence in their authority that they didn't need to respond to challenges from subordinates. But Walsh's own complicated relationship with military authority kept him from speaking up, even as his instincts warned him that this situation was spiraling toward disaster. The other crew members were enjoying the show, completely unaware that they were witnessing the destruction of their employment and possibly their careers. Jake Morrison was recording parts of the confrontation on his phone, thinking he was documenting another successful assertion of contractor authority. Carl Stevens was making quiet comments to Luis Vargas about how easy it was to intimidate military personnel when you stood up to them with confidence. The O'Brien brothers, Danny and Kevin, had positioned themselves to block any escape routes, a tactic they had used in previous confrontations to ensure that military personnel couldn't simply walk away from Brennan's lectures. They had no idea that their blocking maneuver was being observed and mentally catalogued by someone who would soon have them arrested for intimidation of military personnel. Admiral Kane's silence was strategic and devastating. Every second that passed without her revealing her identity allowed Brennan to commit additional violations that would strengthen the case against him. Her legal training had taught her that the most effective way to build an ironclad case was to allow the perpetrator to fully demonstrate their intent and character before revealing the true consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, Brennan was becoming increasingly agitated by Admiral Kane's refusal to be intimidated. In his experience, aggressive confrontation usually resulted in quick submission from military personnel who wanted to avoid conflict. Her calm demeanor was throwing off his usual script and making him more desperate to assert dominance. "Are you even listening to me?" Brennan demanded, raising his voice loud enough that other workers across the construction site began to notice the confrontation. "I'm trying to educate you about how the real world works, but you're standing there like some kind of statue. Maybe you're too stupid to understand that you don't belong here." The insult hung in the air like a physical presence, witnessed by Martinez, the construction crew, and several other military personnel who had stopped their activities to observe the increasingly heated exchange. What none of the witnesses realized was that they were watching the precise moment when Tyler Brennan's career in defense contracting ended forever. Admiral Kane had heard enough. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew her phone, but instead of revealing her identity immediately, she made the strategic decision to document Brennan's behavior for official proceedings. She activated her phone's recording function and held it at her side, capturing audio of what would happen next. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made Corporal Martinez immediately stand even straighter, "I think you should reconsider your approach to this situation." Brennan interpreted her measured response as weakness and doubled down on his aggression. "Reconsider? Lady, the only thing I'm reconsidering is whether to have security escort you off this site for interfering with critical defense work. You've got about 30 seconds to explain what possible authority you think you have to tell me how to run my operation." The question of authority was exactly what Admiral Kane had been waiting for. She lifted her phone to her ear and spoke clearly enough for everyone present to hear. "Commander Torres? This is Admiral Kane. I need you to contact the base security commander immediately. We have a situation at the construction site that requires immediate attention." The effect of those words was immediate and dramatic. Corporal Martinez's eyes widened in recognition and he immediately moved to a position of attention. Derek Walsh felt his stomach drop as he realized exactly who they had been confronting for the past 10 minutes. The crew members who had been enjoying the show suddenly looked uncertain and concerned. But Tyler Brennan, incredibly, still didn't understand what was happening. "Admiral? You're claiming to be an admiral?" Brennan laughed, though the laughter sounded forced and nervous. "Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but impersonating military officers is a federal crime. You're in serious trouble now." Admiral Kane continued her phone call, ignoring Brennan's accusations. "Also, please have someone from the contracting office meet me here within the hour. We need to review Pinnacle Construction Solutions security clearances and contract compliance immediately. And contact NCIS, we have multiple violations of base security protocols that require investigation." As she spoke, Admiral Kane's bearing and tone made it impossible for anyone with military experience to doubt her authority. Martinez knew he was witnessing something extraordinary, the moment when military justice caught up with civilian contractors who had forgotten that respect and professionalism were not optional on military installations. The trap had been sprung, and Tyler Brennan was still too arrogant and ignorant to realize that he was already caught. The transformation in the construction site atmosphere was immediate and total. Within minutes of Admiral Kane's phone call, the rumble of approaching vehicles could be heard across the facility grounds. What had moments before been Tyler Brennan's domain, where he exercised unchallenged authority over military personnel, was about to become the epicenter of a military justice operation that would dismantle his company's entire defense contracting business. The first vehicle to arrive was a black military police SUV, followed closely by Commander Torres in her official Navy sedan. As the vehicles approached, Brennan finally began to grasp the magnitude of his situation, though he still couldn't quite accept that the woman he had been insulting was actually a flag officer with the authority to destroy his career. "This is some kind of mistake," Brennan muttered to Derek Walsh, his voice lacking the confidence that had characterized his behavior just minutes earlier. "She can't actually be an admiral. Admirals don't walk around construction sites in civilian clothes." Walsh, whose military experience gave him a better understanding of military protocol than his boss, was watching Admiral Kane's interaction with the arriving military police with growing dread. The immediate deference shown by uniformed personnel, the crisp salutes, and the formal military courtesy being displayed left no doubt about her actual rank and authority. Commander Torres emerged from her vehicle and approached Admiral Kane with the kind of precise military bearing that comes from years of serving as an aide to senior officers. She carried a tablet and a thick folder that Brennan would soon learn contained comprehensive documentation of every complaint, security violation, and breach of contract that Pinnacle Construction Solutions had committed during their time at Naval Postgraduate School. "Admiral Kane," Commander Torres said, executing a perfect salute, "Colonel Thompson and the NCIS team are en route. The contracting office has been notified, and legal is standing by to begin contract termination procedures. How would you like to proceed?" The formality of the military protocol surrounding Admiral Kane's response finally broke through Tyler Brennan's denial. He was watching the systematic deployment of military authority with the precision of a well-rehearsed operation, and he was beginning to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding that could be resolved through aggressive posturing or civilian contractor privileges. Admiral Kane's response was measured and professional, delivered in the kind of tone that made it clear she had been preparing for this moment throughout her entire military career. "Commander Torres, I want complete documentation of everything that occurred here this morning. I also want a comprehensive review of Pinnacle Construction Solutions security clearances, background checks, and contract compliance history." She turned toward the construction crew, who were now standing in an uncomfortable cluster near their equipment, uncertain whether they should continue working or prepare to leave. "I want individual interviews with each crew member to determine their level of involvement in the misconduct we witnessed today. Some of these individuals may be victims of poor leadership rather than willing participants in contractor misconduct." Brennan felt a surge of desperate anger as he realized that Admiral Kane was treating his crew like witnesses against him rather than loyal employees who would support his version of events. The unity he had assumed existed within his team was already beginning to fracture as crew members began to understand the serious legal implications of their situation. "Wait just a minute," Brennan said, his voice cracking with stress and disbelief. You can't just come in here and destroy a legitimate business because of some misunderstanding about respect and authority. We have contracts, legal obligations, and rights as civilian contractors. Admiral Kane turned toward Brennan with the kind of look that had been intimidating subordinates and adversaries for over 2 decades. Her response was delivered with the precision of someone who had spent years studying military law and contractor regulations. Mr. Brennan, you have exactly 0 rights to continued access to this military installation. Your behavior this morning violated multiple federal regulations governing contractor conduct on military facilities. Your company's security clearances are suspended immediately, and your personnel will be escorted off this base within the hour. The arrival of Colonel Thompson, the base security chief, marked the beginning of formal legal proceedings that would ensure Brennan's misconduct had permanent consequences. Thompson stepped out of his vehicle accompanied by 2 NCIS special agents and a representative from the base legal office. The presence of federal law enforcement officers made it clear that this situation had moved far beyond administrative disagreements into the realm of potential criminal violations. Admiral Kane, Colonel Thompson said after rendering appropriate military courtesies, "We have documentation ready for immediate contract termination and facility banning. The NCIS team is prepared to begin interviews and evidence collection. Legal has confirmed that we have sufficient grounds for immediate action under Title 10 security regulations." Derek Walsh, watching the systematic deployment of military and federal law enforcement authority, finally found his voice. "Admiral Kane, ma'am, I want to apologize for my participation in this morning's events. As a former Marine, I should have recognized inappropriate conduct toward military personnel and intervened to prevent this situation." His apology represented the first crack in Brennan's crew's solidarity, and it would soon become a flood as other workers realized that distancing themselves from their boss might be their only chance to avoid criminal charges and permanent banning from military installations. Jake Morrison approached one of the NCIS agents and requested to speak privately about what he had witnessed during his employment with Pinnacle Construction Solutions. Carl Stevens began providing Commander Torres with detailed information about previous incidents involving military personnel that he had been instructed to ignore or misrepresent. Luis Vargas, the youngest crew member, was visibly shaken as he realized that the behavior he had been taught to accept as normal contractor conduct was actually a pattern of criminal misconduct that could result in federal charges. The O'Brien brothers, who had been enjoying the morning's confrontation just minutes earlier, were now standing apart from Brennan and avoiding eye contact with anyone in authority. Within 30 minutes of Admiral Kane's phone call, Tyler Brennan found himself completely isolated, facing the combined authority of the United States Navy, federal law enforcement, and a legal system that he had never understood and consistently underestimated. The trap had not only been sprung, it had snapped shut with the precision and finality of military justice applied by someone who had spent her entire career preparing for exactly this kind of moment. 6 months after Tyler Brennan's ignominious removal from Naval Postgraduate School, the cybersecurity facility stood completed under new management, its gleaming walls a testament to what could be accomplished when civilian contractors understood their role as servants of military personnel rather than their masters. The building had been finished ahead of schedule and under budget by Meridian Defense Solutions, a veteran-owned company that treated every military member with the respect they had earned through service. Admiral Rebecca Kane stood in her office reviewing the final reports on what had become known throughout the Pacific Fleet as the Pinnacle Incident. The comprehensive investigation had revealed a pattern of contractor misconduct that extended far beyond the single morning confrontation that had brought down Tyler Brennan's company. NCIS had uncovered evidence of systematic overcharging, security violations, and a deliberate pattern of disrespect toward military personnel that had been occurring across multiple installations. The legal consequences had been swift and severe. Pinnacle Construction Solutions had been permanently banned from all Department of Defense contracting, with Tyler Brennan personally blacklisted from any future involvement in federal projects. The company had been forced to pay over $2.8 million in fines and restitution, and Brennan himself faced federal charges for security violations and fraudulent billing practices. Derek Walsh, the former Marine foreman, had cooperated fully with investigators and avoided criminal charges in exchange for his testimony about Pinnacle's systematic misconduct. He had since found employment with a veteran-owned construction company where his military experience was valued rather than exploited. His cooperation had been instrumental in building the case that ensured Brennan's permanent removal from defense contracting. The other crew members had faced varying consequences based on their level of participation in the misconduct. Jake Morrison and Carl Stevens had received suspended sentences and community service requirements after providing detailed testimony about Brennan's instructions to intimidate military personnel. Luis Vargas, the youngest worker, had been cleared of criminal charges but required to complete sensitivity training before being allowed to work on military installations again. The O'Brien brothers, who had been most enthusiastic about participating in the intimidation of military personnel, faced the harshest consequences short of Brennan himself. They received federal convictions for conspiracy to intimidate military personnel and were banned from all federal facilities for 5 years. Their construction careers effectively ended, serving as a powerful example to other civilian contractors about the real consequences of disrespecting service members. Perhaps most importantly, the Pinnacle incident had triggered a comprehensive review of contractor oversight procedures throughout the Pacific Fleet. Admiral Kane had been tasked with developing new protocols that would prevent similar situations from occurring at other installations. Her Dignity and Respect protocol had been adopted fleet-wide, ensuring that civilian contractors understood both their obligations and the consequences of misconduct. The protocol included mandatory respect training for all civilian contractors working on military installations, immediate reporting procedures for military personnel who experience contractor misconduct, and streamlined processes for contract termination when civilians violated respect and professionalism standards. Most significantly, it established clear authority for installation commanders to take immediate action against contractors who demonstrated disrespect toward military personnel. Corporal James Martinez had completed his medical retirement ceremony the week after the Pinnacle incident, but the event had been transformed from a routine administrative procedure into a celebration of military service and sacrifice. Admiral Kane had personally presented Martinez with a letter of commendation for his professionalism and dignity in the face of civilian contractor misconduct, and his story had become an inspiration throughout the wounded warrior community. Martinez had successfully transitioned to civilian cybersecurity work, accepting a position with a defense contractor that valued his military experience and combat insights. His research on improving military cybersecurity protocols had been incorporated into the new facility's design, ensuring that his service continued to protect military personnel even after his retirement from active duty. The cybersecurity facility itself had become a model for contractor military cooperation. Meridian Defense Solutions had hired several transitioning veterans, including 2 wounded warriors who brought unique perspectives to the project. The company's respectful and professional approach to military personnel had resulted in exceptional performance ratings and additional contract opportunities throughout the Pacific Fleet. Admiral Kane's reputation as a protector of military personnel had been enhanced rather than damaged by her decisive action against Pinnacle Construction Solutions. Her willingness to use her authority to defend a wounded Marine had earned respect throughout the military community and had been noted by senior Pentagon leadership. She had been selected to brief Congress on contractor oversight reforms, and her protocols were being considered for implementation throughout all military services. The morning inspections that had led to the confrontation with Tyler Brennan had become a regular feature of Admiral Kane's leadership style. She continued to conduct unannounced visits to contractor work sites, always in civilian clothes, always watching for signs that military personnel were being treated with anything less than complete respect. Her reputation had spread throughout the defense contracting community, and companies working on her installations understood that professionalism and respect were not optional. The impact extended beyond individual careers and company fortunes. The Pinnacle incident had sent a clear message throughout the defense contracting industry that military personnel, especially wounded warriors, were under the protection of leaders who possessed both the authority and determination to hold civilians accountable for their behavior. Contractor companies had begun implementing their own respect and professionalism training programs, understanding that a single incident of misconduct could destroy their entire business relationship with the Department of Defense. For Admiral Rebecca Kane, the incident had validated the approach to leadership she had learned on her grandfather's porch in Glacier Falls, Montana. Real leaders shield others from the storm, even when nobody's watching. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not against foreign enemies, but against the casual cruelty and institutional indifference that can make service members feel unwelcome in their own country. As she watched the sun set over Monterey Bay from her office window, Admiral Kane reflected on the letter she had received that morning from Rosa Martinez, Corporal Martinez's mother. The letter expressed gratitude not just for defending her son, but for sending a message to military families everywhere that their sacrifices were valued and protected by leaders who understood the true meaning of service. The cybersecurity facility stood as more than just a building. It was a symbol of what could be accomplished when civilian contractors and military personnel worked together with mutual respect and shared purpose. Every time Admiral Kane saw its completed structure, she was reminded that sometimes the most important victories come not from defeating enemies, but from protecting the people who have already given so much in service to something greater than themselves. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, and new chances to ensure that every person in uniform knew they were valued, respected, and protected by leaders who understood that military service, especially service that comes with sacrifice, deserves nothing less than complete honor and dignity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.